Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification course. If you're here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters, or if you're watching us online, feel free to sit down, get your pen and paper, pencil, notebook, and be sure, if you don't have a book, to go ahead and if you're watching on Facebook, at the top of the menu there, or the top of the page on our Peaceful Solution page, there's a little drop-down menu, and it has all the books. Right now, we're covering the Respect unit of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Junior High Series or Intermediate Series. And tonight, we're going to be talking about respecting ourselves. We're in Chapter 2. We left off on, Chris left off on page, looks like 28, the dark side of conformity and peer pressure. That's what we're going to be covering to get things started tonight. I'm glad everyone braved the sub 30s, I guess you might call it. It's not sub-zero, but it's pretty cold out there. So congratulations for getting here. And yes, Texas actually gets cold. I know some people think, when I used to live in Alaska, I always thought of Texas as a very hot place. Well, it depends what part of Texas you're in and what time of year it is. So anyway, we'll be picking up on page 28. But before we do that, we're always going to go back and do a little rehearsal of what the other teachers covered leading up to this page. And what I'd like to do is, first of all, go back to let's go back to page 25. Because 26. I do want to remind us that we're covering self-respect. That's the name of the chapter. It's called Respect for Myself. And I want to remind us what self-respect is as we proceed. At the top of page 26, it says, self-respect is knowing who you are, what you stand for, and what you value. And, as we learn in the Peaceful Solution, you've got to stand for something or you're going to fall for anything, and we should always stand for what's positive, what's morally correct, what's beneficial, that doesn't bring harm to ourselves and somebody else. We also learn that self-respect involves caring about ourselves physically and mentally to promote positive growth and development. And there's something I want to go back and look at on LP2A in your book, LP2A, if you have a teacher's manual. In where it talks about the note to the teacher, I want to quickly read here. It says in the middle of the page, or toward the bottom, it's like right about the third paragraph. It says, for some students, this might be the first time they receive any information on how to develop respect for themselves. So, don't take for granted, that children know, or even adults, full-grown adults know what self-respect encompasses, because as we just read on page 26, a lot of times when you ask children, when we go and do presentations, we ask them, what are some of the ways that you respect yourself? And they most always go to, brushing your teeth, wearing clean clothes. It's always the outer self. It's always the outer appearance. Okay, I'll comb my hair, brush my teeth, wear, neat clothes, etc. But I've never heard anybody say, know what I stand for, what I value, my character, what kind of person I am on the inside, how do I treat others. We don't hear anything about that. It's always the outer self. So, and that's not their fault, but it's because that's what they're being taught. Even in school, they're really big on dress code. Make sure you're in dress code if they have a dress code at school. But there's really no code per se of conduct when it comes to how they behave except I know in the elementary school, they used to teach us a lot of the basic how to get along with people type things. Keep your hands and feet to yourself. How to share. Don't take cuts in line, things like that. But we never really learned anything near what we learned in the Peaceful Solution Character Education program when it comes to self-respect, because it deals with not just the outer person, but the inner self as well, the body and, the mind, the development of a person's character. So we also learn, I'm back on page 26, why learning to respect ourselves is important. It says the ability to respect yourself is important for your growth and development. Without self-respect, you could be prone to make choices that have negative consequences. And, that's where the education or the awareness comes in. It's so important because, not knowing the pitfalls and the curveballs that await us out there, like we learned in the character unit about the curveballs and pitfalls, if we don't know what they are, what the traps are, we're always going to keep falling into them because we don't have that education and that awareness of what can bring negative consequences in our lives. And it says many of our choices will come from a need to fit in with friends in order to feel a sense of belonging. And then it talks in a little bit about conformity, which we're going to get into a little more tonight as well. And I wanted to remind us what the word conformity means. It means changing the way we think and act in order to fit in. In order to fit in. And one of the most common reasons for conformity is peer pressure. And it's a major test of our ability to respect ourselves. And I believe it might have been Chris. It could have been Catan. Could have even been David. But one of the previous teachers talked about ability, the word ability, and how, how testing a child's ability to use self-control and respect themselves is almost, laughable when they haven't been educated on the ability to do these things. If they haven't been taught self-control, like they learn in the Peaceful Solution, and they haven't learned, about making right choices and what a right choice is, what a wrong choice is. If they haven't been taught these things, then of course they're going to fall into these traps. Of course they're not going to pass the test. They're not going to have the ability to be able to do these things. It's like saying, go fix your pipes in your house when you've never been taught plumbing, Well, if you've never been given the ability or been taught the knowledge, remember, knowledge is power. If you haven't been given the knowledge to do something, how can you actually do it correctly? So remember, it is a major test, peer pressure, of our ability to respect ourselves. Now let's go over to page 28, and we'll pick up where Chris left off on the dark side of conformity. And when you see that dark side, then that means there's also a light side or a bright side to conformity. As we learn, there's positive conformity and there's negative conformity. Sometimes fitting in is perfectly fine, as long as it's moral. It doesn't bring harm to yourself or somebody else. And also, there's also a positive side to peer pressure. Sometimes, for an example, friends can pressure one another to make the right decision, okay? Where harm isn't brought to themselves, someone else, or the environment. For instance, pressuring, somebody to, make sure they do their best to pass the test. Hey, why don't you come study with me tonight instead of going to that dumb movie? That can wait. We need to get ready for our test tomorrow at school, as an example. Okay, so it says, having friends with whom you are comfortable is an important part of growing up. And for the most part, conformity can be harmless and even positive in some cases, as I just explained. It becomes a problem when you feel pressured to act in a way that could jeopardize your health and safety. So remember, if it's something that puts your health and safety at risk, it's not something that you want to do, okay? But again, that's where the education comes in. You've got to know what brings harm. You've got to know, because somebody, as we've seen in previous lessons, somebody can come to you and say, hey, You want to try sniffing some of this glue with me or some of this gasoline? And you're like, man, doesn't that fry your brain when you do that? Oh, no, man, I do it all the time. It just makes you giggle. Makes you giggle and pass out. But you wake up in a few seconds. And when you wake up from it, you're all giggly and giddy. And it's a lot of fun. Look at me. I'm okay. I've been doing it for, 5 years now. I'm fine. Are you? What is it actually doing to your brain that you can't see in your other organs of your body, that you're not aware of yet? You'll find out when you put the keys in your freezer like I did, and you can't find them, you're like, hey, where's those keys? You look all over the house, and you've looked everywhere but the freezer, and you're like, no way, there's no way they're in there, but there they are. Okay, so it says, read the following article about the effects of peer pressure and conformity. It says the life stage called adolescence, which spans the years from about 11 to 18, has been blamed by numerous researchers as a breeding ground for risky behavior. The influence of peers is considered the single most important factor in determining when and how cigarettes, drugs, and sex are first tried. So this risky behavior, as we learn, risky means, it can endanger your health and your safety, or the health and safety of someone else and property. Now, it talks about the following, and I think this is where he got to. The following are 2 real-life experiences of young people who felt pressure to engage in risky behaviors. So you can put up the first slide so people can have a visual at home if they don't have a book. Now, this is Steve's story. It says, drinking and smoking weed is no big deal. Now, remember, this is what he's saying, okay? This isn't what the Peaceful Solution teaches. Steve says, drinking and smoking weed is no big deal. It's like all my friends do it. It's not like I'm going to sit there while everybody else is having fun. Besides, my friends are cool, and we're tight and all. But if you don't go along with them, they will laugh you right out of the room. Okay, now, keep those things in mind that Steve just shared with us about his quote-unquote, air quote, friends, right? And now let's go ahead and go to the next slide and read Kasha's story. And then we'll get into we'll break these down. Kasha's story says, in my school, everyone has a group they hang out with. When I first came to the school, I was an outsider. When I finally found a group of girls who wanted to hang out with me, I didn't want to lose their friendship, even if it meant sneaking out at night to go to some guy's house that I didn't even know. All right, now keep these stories in mind, and let's go ahead and let's go to slide 3. Because if you recall, they're calling, but they're saying they have some friends at school, okay, that they like to do things with. And what I want to remind us of is from the acceptance unit on page 62 about real friends and choosing friends, okay? And it says, real friends encourage you to do marijuana. I didn't hear anybody. No. A real friend does not encourage you to do drugs, as we're going to see here in a little bit on page 29. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but no, a real friend would not encourage you to do what's wrong, or something that's illegal, something that's a threat or a risk to your health and safety. They won't do that. They'll encourage you to get away from that kind of stuff, to not partake of it at all. As previous teachers have said, friends don't let friends drive drunk. That's what they say in Hollywood. But we say friends don't let friends get drunk. Friends don't go to the bar with their friends and let their friends get drunk and then enable their drunkenness by giving them a ride home, being the designated driver. No, you're the designated getaway driver. What's the difference with that and robbing a bank and being a getaway driver? You're committing some kind of harm. It's the same thing. Now, you probably won't go to jail for it, but you will if you rob a bank. So real friends encourage you to do what's right, the peaceful solution. And it says in choosing friends, it says the importance of choosing positive friends cannot be overstated. People with immoral principles and negative character as friends can influence you to make choices that you could regret for the rest of your life. Learning to recognize the qualities that make a positive friend takes time and effort. Avoid meeting someone and immediately deciding to accept this person as a friend. Now, this is a junior high book, okay? But we have adults that do the same thing. Adults meet people and they immediately decide, I'm going to go home with him. I like how he looks. I just met him, 10 minutes ago here at the bar, but, he looks like you can trust him. He looks like he has a lot of money, and he's dressed really nice, and he's offering to buy me drinks. This can't be a bad thing. And they end up going home with this person. And I remember when I was growing up in Alaska, we had a personal friend that was killed by the Bundy fellow. I think his name was Ted Bundy. He was killing girls in Seattle, Washington. And Seattle is kind of like the sister city of Anchorage, Alaska. And the girl, Vivian Rancourt, you can look it up, it's public knowledge, was killed by Ted Bundy. And Ted Bundy looked like a harmless fellow. He looked like, I think he was very well educated, dressed real well. His mannerisms, his personality was outstanding. In fact, he even was studying law in college. And when he had his trials for the murders that he committed, he actually defended himself. He was his own lawyer. And you know what the jurors said about him? He's a likable guy. I really like this guy. He had a way with people. But remember, personality doesn't show you what a person's true character is. That's why it's very important to learn how to choose friends correctly. And as we're going to learn, there's certain stages you have to go through to decide whether or not you want to make friends. And I'm just kind of jumping ahead, so let me continue to read here. Take your time to learn about him or her first. Remember, just because someone has a great personality does not mean they have a positive moral character. When choosing friends, keep these things in mind and proceed with wisdom and caution. Wisdom and caution. And remember, Chris talked last class about wisdom being, putting knowledge into use. Knowledge is power, and it's great to have the information, but we've actually got to put it into use, okay? And that's where we become wise. And proceed with wisdom and caution. Now, let's go to the next slide, because it talks about on page 63, if you remember in the acceptance unit, about these 4 stages of friendship. Everybody wants to have friends, but we've got to be wise. We've got to teach children to be careful and be wise in doing these things. And the first stage should be the observation stage. You observe a person's interaction with their peers and adults. How someone treats others, especially when they're antagonized or frustrated, says a lot about their character and personality. So be careful of those who are easily angered or take out their frustration on others by being hostile, aggressive, or violent. Well, why is that a big deal? Well, because, you might be thinking, well, they wouldn't do that to me because I'm their friend. But no, that's their character. They're actually, what you're observing is what they're all about. So if they do it to other people, they'll do it to you as well. Number 2 is the introductory stage. Once you observe that person to be respectful and well-mannered, you can choose to introduce yourself. Through conversation, you can learn more about each other. Talk about current events, your likes and dislikes, and keep your conversation respectful and appropriate. In other words, you don't want to sit there and talk about what girls you like at school and, what violent movies you like to watch and what kind of video games do you like to play that, like Mortal Kombat or, some of them probably, 30 years behind because I don't play video games, but, that was what was popular when I was in school or just getting out of high school. I graduated in 1981, so, a lot of those, I remember the first video game that actually had a gun that were shooting people was that one where they go through every room and, all you can see is the end of a gun barrel. And I think that came out in like 1984 after I graduated from high school. I think the worst thing we had when I went to high school was asteroids and Pac-Man, chewing up little dots and blowing up asteroids with some kind of laser weapon. And, they've gotten to where they are now, with the Call of Duty and all that other stuff. Very realistic and very inappropriate for a Peaceful Solution Character Education Program student. Okay, now the third stage is the getting to know you stage. Listen carefully to what your potential friend says. What does he or she believe about moral principles? And, it's not like they're going to talk about moral principles. They're not going to use the word moral principles because they probably don't even know what they are, right? But you can tell by what they say about things about, authority figures. Like if they sit there and they down the teacher, or they down their parents, and they talk, they tease other people. If they antagonize people or bully people, call people names. These are the kind of ways that you can see, what their character's all about and how they really feel about moral principles, okay? Because moral means harmless. Doesn't bring harm to you, others, the environment, etc. Okay, so it says, if your potential friend tells you that cheating is okay, or that for fun she goes to the mall and shoplifts, then red flags should be going up. These are clear signals that you should proceed with caution. Try letting that person know that stealing is wrong and tell them why. Explain the conflicts that it causes. Now, that's what a true friend would do. In other words, it's not telling you that, get up, run away from them, and never talk to them again. It's telling you if they show that they're doing those kind of things or that they value the wrong things, there's nothing wrong with you letting them know that there's something wrong with that. You shouldn't do that. I'd really like to be your friend, but if you're going to be doing those kind of things, I can't be hanging out with you. Okay, that's what you should be letting them know. You should give them an opportunity. And if they value you, if they value your friendship, right, they'll consider what they're doing and possibly turn from those behaviors. Now, the final stage of, friends or choosing your friends is the deciding stage. Now, carefully consider if you want to pursue a friendship with someone who is dishonest or cheats or steals. Why is that? They won't steal from you, right? They'll only steal from everyone else. Wrong. I know, I used to be a thief. I was an equal opportunity thief. I didn't, I stole money out of my own mom's purse. I stole money out of my grandma's purse. Okay? My grandma was on Social Security and I stole out of her purse. Okay? So don't take it from an ex-thief. It doesn't matter. Okay? Someone who lacks moral principles, no, it's a proven fact that you will be known by the company you keep. That's another problem. Remember, birds of a feather are thought to flock together. So if your friend is a thief and they're known to be a thief or known to be a liar and you're hanging out with them, you're going to get tagged. You're going to get a tag. And even though you might not do those things, you're known by the company you keep. Okay? And people are going to associate you with those behaviors because you're hanging out with that person. Is that fair? Nobody said life had to be fair, right? It says, someone who lacks moral principles can influence you to make wrong choices. It would be wise to decide to make friends only with people who have positive moral character. In this way, you will be influenced to make right choices. Remember, a right choice is very simple. A right choice doesn't bring harm to you, your neighbor, property, the environment. It's harmless, right? Okay. Now, let's see. Let's talk a little bit. Let's go to the next slide because I want to talk a little bit about, remind us again about conform. Now, we just read on page 26 of the respect unit about what conformity means, and it means changing the way we think and act in order to fit in. Now, remember, in the acceptance unit, it goes a lot deeper into conformity, and it talks about sometimes when making friends, you might find yourself conforming or changing the way you think, act, or feel in order to fit in and be accepted. So if you're changing the way you think, feel, and act, what is swaying you? You remember what that's called? A blank can influence. Oh, I just gave it away. A blank can cause you to think, feel, and act a certain way. It's called an influence. There's influences, right? An influence can affect the way you think, feel, and act, remember? So sometimes your friends can influence you to think, feel, and act a certain way. Because friendships are based on shared similarities, likes and dislikes, some conforming will naturally occur. For example, all your friends like certain designer shirts. Soon, all your friends have similar designer shirts. Owning this shirt has now become a standard for your group of friends. If you then decide that you must wear the same kind of shirt, then you have conformed to the same standard, or a standard of dress anyway, or standard of what shirt you're going to wear. And it shows that one of the most common forms of conformity is called peer pressure. And let's go to the next slide. I'm trying to rehearse a little bit about conformity and peer pressure so we can continue on here in the respect unit. But remember, we learned on page 67 and 68 in the acceptance unit that positive conformity is when you are encouraged to obey proper authority, when you keep yourself and others safe, and you're encouraged to support and practice moral values. So positive conformity, if it doesn't conform to what you just read right here, then it's not positive, it's negative conformity, and you should not want to fit in with that crowd, with that lifestyle. Negative conformity is when you're encouraged to disobey a proper authority figure. Remember, a proper authority figure would be your parents, your teachers, somebody that's responsible for you at the time. We should also disobey authority who asks us to do wrong. We should disobey an authority figure if they ask us to do wrong. In other words, if they ask us to break any peaceful solution principle that we've learned, and they ask us to steal. I think Chris mentioned the other class, about how parents sometimes in other countries, very poor countries, they tend to let their children sell drugs to help them pay the rent. They might give them drugs to mule or carry somewhere to deliver. And if you know that's something that you shouldn't be doing, if you know that that's what's in the bag they just gave you, and they told you to go from point A to point B with it, you have a right to respectfully tell them, no, I don't want to do that. Okay? You have the right to even tell your own parent that. But you have to be respectful about it. You have to tell them respectfully, no, I don't want to break this rule. Okay? Now, we should only disobey authority who asks us to do wrong. Okay? And then negative conformity is also when you compromise your safety or the safety of others. By doing dares, risk-taking behavior, that's compromising safety and other people's safety. Drinking and driving, using drugs and driving, anything like that is compromising the safety, your safety and the safety of other people. Remember, everyone has the right to be, a person with moral principles recognizes that everyone has the right to live in peace, safety, and security. So they should always be thinking, the people that are out on the road that are traveling from their home to the store or, wherever they need to go, they have a right to get there safely without me going out there and stealing their safety by being drunk behind the wheel. Okay? And that's exactly what we're doing when we get behind the wheel of a car when we're not, in our, faculties, proper faculties. And negative conformity is also when you go against your moral values that you have set your mind to follow. When we set our mind to follow a certain set of principles, as we see in the peaceful solution here, we need to set our mind to follow them, and we need to follow through with it. And if we do make a mistake, we make a bad choice, we need to quickly stop, realize where we went wrong, evaluate how we could have done it better. Don't sit there and down yourself and say, I'm never going to be able to do this or whatever. Don't be doing that. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back on track. But make sure you make amends for what you did. Don't just blow it off and say, well, yeah, I did wrong, but, yeah, I'll just move forward. No, if you stole something from somebody, replace it. If you were careless and you broke something, replace it. Don't try to just act like, well, I learned my lesson and the other person just has to live with it. No, you can always right the wrong, whatever you did wrong. Okay, so let's see, where was I at? Okay, let's look at the next slide on conformity. It says negative conformity. It's on page 68 of the acceptance unit. It says negative conformity is not the path to choose. If you follow this path, you will hit a dead end. Don't follow the crowd in doing wrong. Stand up, speak out to all with a positive voice, the peaceful solution. So, just because everyone else is doing something does not mean you should do it or doesn't even make it right. Sometimes you might be the only one standing against something, but you can't be afraid to do that. You've got to be able to grow a backbone. That's called courage. Be courageous, Sometimes you're going to have to do that. It's not all going to be a bed of roses in your life, As a matter of fact, if you're practicing the peaceful solution, you're going to have opposition. And that opposition is only there to help you develop those character traits that you say that you want to develop. If you want to be courageous, you'll have plenty of opportunities to do so. You want to be honest, you'll be confronted with a lot of opportunities to be honest. When you don't have any money and you see some item in the store that you really want, right? That's your opportunity to put into practice honesty. When you give somebody your word, right? When it comes time to keeping your word, there's your opportunity to build that character trait of trust, or that character trait of self-control, or character trait. Sorry, trust is not a character trait, but being trustworthy is a character trait. So if you want to be trustworthy, there's your opportunity right there by keeping your word. Okay? So, all right. So now we can continue on to page 29. Let's go to page 29, and we'll read just the facts. I'm back in the respect unit. It's always very important. I know sometimes it seems kind of a little bit tedious, or why do we keep going back? Well, we keep going back because we got to remind ourselves, refresh our minds, so that what we're getting ready to read here in this page 29 on just the facts, well, we can bring it into focus a little better, because now we remember more about conformity, peer pressure, and the importance of making right choices, and how children aren't even being taught right now, in a curriculum like you're learning to teach, how to make a right decision, or what kind of consequences will come if they do certain things. They don't know these things. So it's important for us to always have our minds refreshed, so we too can learn as teachers to go back, rehearse, and so we can look at these things with a fresh perspective. So on page 29, just the facts. It says, review the following fact sheet about various forms of risky behavior that teens face. All right, and let's go ahead and show the next slide so the people at home have a visual. Now, let's talk about alcohol. Now, First of all, teens should not be drinking alcohol, okay? It's against the law for teens to drink alcohol. But we're living in a world where people are drinking alcohol, where children are drinking alcohol. They're not being supervised properly by adults, so they tend to get into these things. Okay, I think all of us can say that at one time or another we got into these things as young people, and there's a lot of influence out there to get us to do so. But now abusing alcohol is just as dangerous as abusing drugs. Alcohol intoxication impairs judgment and coordination. Okay, that right there should be enough to make you go, well, that's not something I want to conform to. I mean, I need to have proper judgment. I need to be able to make decisions. I mean, if you're a peaceful solutions student and you've made it your ambition to, as we learned in the last slide, set your mind to follow a certain moral values, then you need to be in your right mind to be able to do that. You can't make a right choice when your mind's not working right, when your mind is clouded with alcohol or drugs or some other, or even negative emotions that you're not controlling. You know, if you're under the influence of any of those things, you're not going to make a proper judgment. It's going to impair your judgment. So alcohol intoxication impairs judgment and coordination. This leads to memory lapses. Now, surely everyone wants to have a bad memory, right? No, you want your mind to be sharp, quick, especially a junior high student. You know, you're going to school, you're learning. You know, that's what schools are for, believe it or not. They're for learning. You go there to learn, you know, to pass the test, you know, and so in order to do that, in order to be able to learn properly, you've got to have a clear mind. And you got to have a great memory, because when test time comes around, you can't remember anything because you're, you know, messing your brain up with drugs and alcohol. There could be a problem. It says it can also distort your vision, cause blackouts, and damage every organ in your body. I know, and if you think that this is overblowing it, I know somebody. I had a peaceful solutions student whose father died at the age of, I think he was only like, and she was really young. She was only like 14. Her dad died at the age of like 30, 34. His brain became, his brain just completely gave out from using alcohol. Too much alcohol. Okay, his organs failed because of the alcohol. So this occurs to people at very young ages. You know, 34 is very young. Okay, so we don't want to abuse alcohol, but again, you're dealing with what you should be telling your students in junior high is not to be using alcohol. Okay? They shouldn't even be using it. It's against the law. So don't tell them, well, you can go ahead and do it, just don't abuse it. It is abusing it if you're using it and you're underage. You are abusing it. You're not using it properly. Remember, abuse means not to use something properly. Right now, I think the drinking age in Texas is 21, I believe. Okay? Some states, it might be as young as 19 or even 18. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and let's talk about marijuana use. Now, it says marijuana, this drug negatively affects the parts of the brain that control emotions, memory, and judgment. Well, that could be a problem for a peaceful solution student, right? Somebody that's wanting to use self-control, and you can't control your emotions because you're on marijuana, and your memory is messed up, and you can't make a proper decision or judgment. That's not a great thing. Remember, if it causes a risk to your health and safety, as we just learned on page 28 at the top, where it says it could jeopardize your health and safety, and you're learning here about marijuana, don't listen to those people that are telling you, well, it grows in the woods. It's natural. You know, God put it there, you know, so we can use it. You know, that's why it's there. You know, well, you know what? You don't just go out in the woods and start picking stuff and putting it in your mouth, do you? If you do, you might put the wrong thing in there and die, right? So just because it's in the woods doesn't mean it's there for you to, grind up and to powder and put it in a pipe and smoke, right? Or bake brownies with, or however you want to ingest it, right? First of all, it's illegal in a lot of states. I know in some states they're legalizing it. But again, does that make it right? Morally right because they're legalizing it in some places so they can make money? No. And you're going to have to tell your students that just because a group of adults called legislature, in your state legislature decide we need more money, we need more funds coming in. So you know what? We're not making any money off those guys that are standing on the corner selling that stuff. So let's get a piece of the pie. Let's legalize it so they have to come to us and give us some money. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make it morally right for you to do. Okay, and again, it affects your emotions, your ability to control your emotions, your memory, and your judgment. That can't be a great thing. I'd like to play a video, not today. I'll possibly bring it next time. There was a judge in Laredo, Texas, who made a video for the Peaceful Solution. And, for years and years, he was a district court judge. For years and years, he locked people up. He said, I sent them to jail left and right for using cocaine and other drugs, meth, etc. And he said, he would always tell them, I told you not to do it. I told you if you did it and you came back in my court, I was going to put you away. And here you are again. What is wrong with you? And he says he finally, and it took some things in his life, personal things that he went through with his children to finally realize what the problem was. He said he realized through study that the frontal cortex of the brain of a person that uses drugs is impaired. It actually destroys that part of the brain that helps them to make right judgments. So, when you're sitting there telling them in your courtroom, I told you not to use marijuana. I told you not to use cocaine. I told you, I was going to lock you away. And here you are again. Well, he said, that's like telling a person with cancer, you shouldn't have cancer. Or, somebody with diabetes, you shouldn't have diabetes. Okay? In other words, they can't help it because their brain's been altered and damaged by the drugs they're using. And he realized that. And now he has a very different he's a retired judge, so he's not putting people away in jail anymore. But he said, man, I really regret all the people that I sent away, that I sent to. He said it didn't do him any benefit. It did nothing. But I'm glad he came to that realization, And I'll try to bring that video next time. Hopefully I'll try to bring it so we can see it. Okay. All right. So marijuana. So smoking marijuana can impair short-term memory and block the pathway to long-term memory. It can lessen your ability to solve problems. Well, that's not great. You need to be problem solvers, right? And not only solving problems at school with math and solving other problems for tests and stuff, but we need to be able to solve everyday problems with one another. We need to have a clear mind to be able to make proper judgments on, if that person's bullying me at school, what do I need to do to take proper steps to ensure that this stops taking place? Or, this person wants me to go shoplift with them after school. What should I do here? Like, how can I handle this issue, right? How can I help them, but also keep myself from going along and making the wrong choice? You've got to be in your full right mind. You've got to have your right faculties to make these kind of decisions. You can't when you're using marijuana. And I don't care what anybody says. I used to smoke marijuana, and I know it doesn't motivate you to do anything. Okay? The only thing it motivated me to do is sit on the couch and veg out. And just, with the channel changer, I wasn't motivated to go do my homework. I didn't even care about my homework, okay, when I was high. So don't tell me, that, it helps me to function. No, you just read, you're not really functioning at your optimal level when you're using these kind of things. And I don't care what anybody says. It's a fact. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Reading about another drug here. This is called ecstasy. Use of this amphetamine causes difficulty in telling the difference between reality and fantasy. Oh, so that's really going to be great. You don't know if you're in Disneyland or, the real world. That's going to help you, right? Wrong. It causes problems concentrating. Ecstasy destroys brain. And you know what? That's a problem because most children can't concentrate more than 8 seconds. A goldfish has better concentration, according to a lot of studies. That's not great, because these phones, these devices that they're always looking at, cause them not to be able to concentrate for very long. Not to mention the images on the television set that move very quickly. It makes their brain work very rapidly, so they have a very hard time concentrating when they have to read a book. So ecstasy is not going to be helping you. Ecstasy destroys your brain cells and it impairs memory and can cause paranoia, anxiety, and confusion. And that's not great either. And I remember when I used marijuana, I got paranoid all the time. I was always paranoid, having panic attacks, Like I thought I was having a heart attack, but I'd be right back at it the next day, It's like, why am I wanting to be anxious? Why am I wanting to feel like I'm having a heart attack? Why am I wanting to feel paranoid? Why am I wanting that? Seems like we would want something different for ourselves, but, I guess it's that, what's that definition of insanity? Trying something again and again, thinking you're going to get a different result. All right, let's look at the next slide, inhalants. Okay, so when sniffed, the vapors of glue, gasoline, hairspray, and paint thinner destroy the fatty tissues protecting the nerve cells in the brain. They can slow down or even stop neural transmissions, causing diminished ability to learn, remember, and solve problems. Again, it's diminishing our ability to use our brains properly. This can't be a great thing, Remember, this is risky behavior that all teens are facing, and some of them are doing all these things. Alcohol, marijuana, ecstasy, and inhalants. They're doing all of them sometimes. But as you can see, it's destroying their ability. It's destroying their brain, but it's destroying their other bodily functions, their other body systems, as we learned. I think Catan hit on it last about body systems. I think there's like 11 different body systems in your body that are affected when you overuse alcohol or you use certain drugs, or all drugs have an effect. And some drugs are legal, of course. You can go to the drugstore to buy them with a prescription, but they still have an effect. They're still going to have some kind of an effect on you. That's why they have sometimes 2 or 3 pages of side effects of certain drugs. And, they show all the side effects on that commercial, on those drug commercials in the evening news. And you're like, man, by the time you hear all those effects, you're like, man, is that? And then they say, ask your doctor if this is right for you. You're like, man, that doesn't sound like I want to try that. It says some of the side effects could be a bleeding out of my ears and, heart attack. And no, I don't think I want to try that. But people do. They help a little, but they hurt a lot, okay? And we don't tell anybody in the Peaceful Solution not to use prescription medication, but we do tell you, if it is prescribed by a doctor, you need to make sure that you use it as prescribed. Don't abuse the medication. Don't under-medicate and don't over-medicate. Just do exactly as you're being told by your doctor. Follow the instructions. Okay, so they can slow down neural transmission, okay, and diminish ability to learn, remember, and solve problems. That's inhalants. And I know you don't need to try it. I used to do the hairspray, and when I was about 8 years old, I used to do hairspray, huffing hairspray, and you would actually pass out. You would actually pass out for a few seconds. You would be completely out, and then you would wake up, and when you woke up, you'd feel all giggly, but sometimes you don't wake up. There's children that use those that don't wake up, okay? Because you've cut off, I think it cuts off the actual oxygen to your brain, and it causes you to pass out, and sometimes you don't revive. It's risk-taking, okay? That's why it's first of all, it's destroying your brain cells. You know, you're not getting any smarter by doing it. In fact, you're diminishing your ability to use your brain at its optimal levels. If you're destroying brain cells, you know, it's kind of like destroying your memory in your computer, you know. You don't want to do that. You want to have more memory, if anything. You don't want to diminish the memory, because then you're going to start having what they call glitches and, you know, what was that? Lockups. Yeah, lockups. I have an influence over here sometimes. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So remember, all these things, they're diminishing our abilities to learn and solve problems and to remember things. That's not something that we want in our life. Now, the next one is premarital sex. Having sex before marriage opens the door for teenagers to begin worrying about STDs, abortion, and feelings of neglect and abuse. And, you know, teens shouldn't be worried about anything like that. They should only be worried about passing the next test or, you know, something like that, but not, you know, STDs, abortions. Many teens experiment with sex while under the influence of alcohol and drugs. 55% of teens believe their unplanned pregnancy was the result of having sex while drinking or on drugs. They might not even remember having sex. Well, that's not a great thing. Well, who's the father of your baby? I don't know. I don't remember. It could have been any number of those guys at the party. And again, parents, I'm warning you, you parents that are watching this, if your child comes to you and they say they want to go to a party, they're not going to be blowing little, you know, those little things they blow, and they're not going to be having balloons and lemonade and cake and ice cream. No, they're going to be having ecstasy and marijuana and inhalants and alcohol, and there's going to be premarital sex going on. Grow up. What were you doing when you asked your parents to go to the party? What were they doing in high school when you were growing up? They're doing the same thing with your children now, the children that you have now. And don't sit there and say, parents, well, I don't have the moral authority to tell them not to do it because I used to do it. Yeah, you used to make wrong choices. So why encourage them to make wrong choices? You say you care about them. You say you value them. You say you love them. Why send them off somewhere where you know this is going on? And it's going on. Don't live with rose-colored glasses on your face. Take them off. You're living in a very dangerous world. Yes, parents, grow up. All of us need to grow up. Remember, I told you, you know, grown-ups do the same things because we haven't all been taught moral character, okay? And if you're learning it now, it's never too late. You know, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's not true, okay? You can teach an old dog new tricks. I'm not calling anybody a dog. I'm just saying that you can learn at any age. You can change. I don't care if you're 99 years old right now and you're watching this program and you're getting this information. You can choose today to stop any negative behavior and turn your life around. Even if you only have a few days of life left, you can still turn around and make the change. And it will be credited to you that you made that change. All right, so let's look at the last slide, I believe, for the evening. I think it's the last slide. Okay, yeah. So, it's not the last one, but this one is the bottom of page 29. It says, did you know that you could acquire STDs by having sexually transmitted diseases by, let me reread that because I just broke my own rule. I called it a disease, and it's not. It's a dis-ease, okay? So let's do it the right way. Did you know that you could acquire sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, by having sex just one time with someone who's infected? Did you know that? Parents, did you know that your daughter or your son can get an STD today because you're not supervising them properly? And they're going to live with it the rest of their life because they have no cure for these STDs. And it's not just a nuisance when they get gonorrhea or chlamydia or something. It actually causes bad damage to their heart, their liver. Yes. What's that called? What's that disease that you get with the liver? What's that called? Hepatitis C. It destroys their brain, like syphilis. It destroys the heart, chlamydia. Chlamydia is a silent killer. A lot of people have heart attacks every day because of chlamydia from an STD, and they don't even know it was an STD. People infected with an STD still look healthy and normal. You know, like, it's some of the more popular people that had STD, like Magic Johnson. I think he has, the basketball player used to play for the Lakers. He has HIV. He's had it for years. He looks healthy and normal. You wouldn't know whether the person was infected until you became infected. And by that time, it will be too late. Some of these diseases can cause health problems for the rest of your life. Does that sound like something that, that's terrible too. Think about that for a minute, You go out and you get involved with somebody and you do this, and you think you're having fun and it feels great and, all this other stuff. The emotions are running high, you're excited, you're consumed by your desire for this person. And then after all the thrill is gone, you don't even know that anything's wrong with you, sometimes for years and years. In fact, they were showing, I believe in this slide here, I got a couple statistics. It says 20 million new STDs a year, and half of those are among youth ages 15 to 24. And a lot of the HIV infections are people that are around 25 years of age. Well, guess what? That's when they find out they have it. So when do you think they got it if they're 25? Oh, they got it way back here when they were a teenager. And now it's been sitting and incubating in their body all those years that they thought they got away with it. And when they're about 24 or 25, they find out they got an STD. But they didn't get that STD right when they went to the doctor. They got it way back when they engaged in the premarital sex that they should have been engaging in. They should have waited for marriage. Nobody was supervising them. They sent them to the party. They thought, well, all children should go out and have fun. They should be able to go out and with their friends and be able to, drive around in their car and waste gas, driving up and down the strip, cruising the strip. What do you think they're doing when they're cruising in the car? I know. I used to cruise in the car. They're looking for girls and they're doing drugs and they're drinking in the car while they're driving. They're also racing their cars. Man, we need to, we really need to face reality here. This is what's taking place in our world, Well, should we ignore it? Should we not say it? Now look on the bottom of page 29. When it comes to your mind and your body, there's no exchanges and no refunds. Take care of them because they're all you're going to get. You're not going to get a new brain or new organs. They're all you're going to get. You can't go trade them in at Best Buy or get new memory at Best Buy for your brain and, like you can your computer. You can't do it. So the peaceful solution says take care of it because it's all you're going to get. And that's all the time I'm going to get tonight. It's already 6:30. Tonight, or actually the next class, will be on 2/5/2023 at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. It might be a little warmer. I think I saw an outlook of 60s. So great job, everyone, getting here tonight. Remember to keep your focus on the peaceful solution, and you can't go wrong. Have a great evening.